Greetings and welcome to Epic Battlecry! This is the place where we come through the crap to bring you the real deal on the gaming industry today. I'm Britt Adams, joined by my notables of napalm, my singularities of slaughter, Tony Grice and Daniel Kaiser. What's going on?
I'm assuming your daughter's not sleeping anywhere near you.
She's not sleeping anywhere.
That's actually how he sings to her at night.
But she can sleep through anything.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Rockabye baby!
That's right.
That's a really violent
on the treetop!
So it deserves to be sung like that.
Strictly speaking, singularities is probably not being used properly in this context, but seeing as how it's the last one of these I'm ever going to do, I think I get a little latitude on that.
Yeah.
You do.
So anyway, it's Wednesday.
You get to be lazy on the last one.
Basically, I mean, like on the last one. Come on. It's Wednesday, October the 1st, 2014. And this is the last episode of the daily edition of Epic Battlecry that will ever grace Odin's Day. Because as we announced last week and have announced every day this week,
and we'll continue to announce the next 2 days. I'm just going to warn you ahead of time.
In case for whatever reason the Odin's Day editions are always the best, and those are the only ones you listen to. We are hanging up the mic. This is going to be the last week of daily shows, and then next week we're going to do a wrap up audio podcast, a bit of a retrospective to say goodbye to you guys and each other, and then Epic Battlecry is going dark. So that's sad news, but what's good news is we're not there yet, and we've still got some fun to be had. Today we're gonna be talking about a question that comes to us from Justo Figueroa, who is at Just Likes to Draw on Twitter, who asks us at Epic Battle Axe, what do you guys think a new IP needs to break into the market nowadays? Not indie video games, but bigger titles like Remember Me. And then he adds a question mark on the end to indicate that it is an interrogative sentence. So anyway, Tony, what do you what is your answer to Justo's question? What do you think AAA IPs, new AAA IPs, what do you think that they need to break out and stand out these days?
Money.
Lots of it.
All right, good answer.
And lots of money. No, it's sort of, I think it's sort of a little bit of a downside to the fact that video games have become such a big industry at this point that these big AAA titles really are going to, with rare exception, they're going to be, coming from the same studios, the same developers, and so it's kind of one of those things where the biggest of the big 90% of the time are going to be, the next game from Naughty Dog, the next game from Bungie, the next game from, well, maybe not the next from Bungie, but because you'll be waiting a while. But like the whole idea is that I sort of think it's like this to actually break in. Like I think the kind of spirit of the questions he's asking, like what can somebody do to get that huge game, not something that's really popular indie-wise, because I do think that's quite a bit different. You can be quirky, you can have sort of like a one-trick pony, if you will, that's enough to get you interest. I mean, you look at something like a Flappy Bird. Flappy Bird was hugely popular, and frankly, I think it's a terrible game. But it was hugely popular because it just hit this note, and it's free to play, and it's this, that, and the other, or whatever. But for a big game to do it, I really do. It really is hard for it to do it without money, without the backing of a studio that's really, putting it out there. Beyond that, it's not enough, honestly, to be just a really interesting concept or have a really cool character or something. The example I would sort of use is something like Remember Me is not a bad example. Like it kind of came from came from a team that that had a kind of a neat concept behind it. It had a cool look to it. I don't think anybody that looked at the game kind of thought like, okay, that looks like crap. I think everybody was kind of like, that looks kind of interesting. Yeah. And just didn't go anywhere. Just didn't grab enough attention. And I would argue a lot of that is down to marketing and whatnot. And maybe it just didn't get marketed enough. Although I think it probably had a better chance at it than some other games. So it's that mix of having the backing and the support of your company, along with, kind of having something that just catches somebody's eye. And that thing that catches somebody's eye, it's always going to be different.
Right.
You can't just count on, hey, let's make a really good set of characters. You know what? There's tons of games with great characters that didn't get big.
Right.
You may come up with some really cool concept for like the gameplay in your game, and again, if it doesn't come out the right time or get support from the right person reviewing it, or a tweet from some fucking person that's big enough that everybody says like, hey, this person's playing this game, I want to play this game.
Right.
Beyond those things, I said 90, it's probably like 95% of the time, it's going to be dictated by the advertising, the pushing it, the getting it out there. I hope another big industry like the movie industry, I hope we see something maybe along the lines of like a Guardians of the Galaxy,
right?
Where one of these big studios genuinely takes a chance on a genuinely new franchise gaming wise, and just pushes the utter shit out of it, market wise,
right?
And really gives it a fair chance. The only problem is they've got to have a lot of faith in it, and I don't think that necessarily these companies rely on faith in games. They rely on numbers and looking back in the past and saying, hey, we know, these games have been good for us, so let's keep pushing them. Or this studio has always been good to us, so let's keep pushing it. It's
why not
I wish I could say
why
it's
not
just
go
the
with
one
the sure thing. Why not bet on the bet on the sure thing.
Exactly. And unfortunately I don't really see that changing. Although, like I said, I do think something like Guardians of the Galaxy has shown that in the movies at least, you can make it happen. If you really have faith in something and market it properly, it can be the biggest movie of the fucking year from characters that a talking fucking raccoon.
Right.
You can do that and make it work, but you have to have faith in it.
And a
like I
talking
said,
pro wrestler, which is also pretty remarkable.
That is it's very true.
Yeah, but the only caveat I would add to that is that Guardians actually delivered on what it promised. And that's the other thing is that,
but, I think I get you, but
the
just the last little thing I'll say, some of those games deliver on what they promised too. They just don't get the exposure, I think.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's kind of got to be both. Like, if you really are really going to push that marketing and you're really going to promise people this is going to be the most fun you'll have playing a video game this year, you can, I mean, like pushing that out there, getting that message out there is very important, but you also need to make sure and deliver a really fun game too.
Yeah. No. DK, what do you think? Are you sort of on the same page?
I'm on the same page in that it has a lot to do
Let's
with
move on then.
But my thoughts are that, it's a lot of work. As we talked about earlier in this week, a company like Blizzard taking 7 years to work on a game and not feeling it and not walking away saying this is going to make a big, for every, there's a lot of games that go through with launch and end up not, being successful, even though even companies like Blizzard can absorb that type of hit, but a lot of other companies can't. But the key thing for me, in addition to I totally agree in everything you're talking about, marketing, exposure, but the number one thing for me and what makes a new IP successful is to have a unique identity. The identity is a huge part. Now we've seen Destiny launched, Watch Dogs launched. We're seeing new IPs, and that's a good thing for our industry to see that companies are taking chances, especially in a very sequel-driven industry. But, the separation between the games that work and games that don't work usually comes down to identity. I mean, look at games, the difference between a Dragon's Dogma and a Dark Souls is that I can't tell you who the main character is in Dark Souls, but I know it's a freaking hard game and it has an identity and it has something that people align themselves with that say, I want to be involved with that. You look at a company like Insomniac, they released a game Fuse, total flop, and no identity, completely generic. They didn't do it what they needed to do with that, but now they're primed with another hit, Sunset Overdrive, that has an identity and actually seems to offer something kind of unique. The buzz about that game is really good going into its launch. And for games like Remember Me, I think it suffers from a lack of having a distinct identity. You think of Mirror's Edge. You think, okay, Mirror's Edge had the parkour mechanic. Sorry, slightly dyslexic there. But other games, you know, like you look at franchises in the last generation that launched, you think about like Assassin's Creed. It had an identity. It's stealth. It's got, you know, the time element and the different periods and things like that. So I think the identity of a game, focusing on what it's going to mean, that you could kind of create something that people want to talk about or think about when they're not actually playing the game, then you've got this the basis for building a new IP upon. And I think that is hugely important to establish that identity, make sure that it's unique and has an audience that is looking forward to it.
Can I ask you just real quick before you have your point, just ask something, because you mentioned
Brent
Fuse.
doesn't get a point.
Just real quick though, you mentioned Fuse. I think that's a great example of, like, I think if you go back and look at Fuse, look at the sort of the marketing and some of the trailers for that, it actually did have a personality to it. I actually
started off.
Yeah, well, no, that's my whole point though, and
it.
that's sort of my point though, is like,
yeah.
I feel like for whatever reason, and it wasn't necessarily like it didn't have an identity, it just, for whatever reason, it didn't ring with audiences at that time. Whereas they bring out something like Sunset Overdrive, which I actually argue you could see a lot of correlation between those two games in terms of like some of the humor and maybe not the look and feel 100%, but a little bit. It is kind of a sort of exaggerated, kind of colorful world. Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot of things, but it just, for whatever reason, it didn't work at that time. And I think that really does come down to that sort of thing I was talking about before, of like timing, like and just luck. Like, I guarantee you there are certain games, if they had just come out at different times, maybe, and it's not even just like they came out at a bad time because they were going up against another game. Maybe it's just because people weren't looking for the type of game they were out with at that point.
Right.
Anyway, I'm sorry. I just wanted to make that point.
You can be before your time or behind your time. So hitting that sweet spot is very important. I mean, you look, but again, identity. I mean, nobody was really asking for Eco or Shadow of the Colossus, but when those games came out, they had such a distinct identity and experience.
They really didn't. Did they do very well though? I mean, realistically, I don't think that when they first came out, either of those games did particularly well popularity-wise. They kind of became cult hits because they went
Next
down the
name
road.
For my band is
cool. But I think realistically, that was one of those where honestly, I think it could have been one of those that got kind of lost, and then people rediscovered it later on.
Yeah.
But anyway, Brent, I'm sorry, I'm stepping on you there. What do you think?
The thing for me, I think that if any of us had the answer to this question, I think we'd be making a lot of money and working for some big game publisher and and telling them, do this, carry this here, get water, cook rice, and that kind of thing. I think we'd be directing something that was worth a lot of money. I think that all of us kind of have a piece of what might be an answer, but all I can say with certainty is what gets me to play new IPs, because as I sit here thinking about it, most of the games I play are either sequels or IPs based on based on an existing property. South Park: The Stick of Truth, Alien Isolation, and so forth. Like the number of games
like
that I play.
Red Dead being slightly based on GTA in terms of premise.
That's it. And of course it's a spiritual successor to Red Dead Revolver, obviously. Right. But yes, but essentially Red Dead being like GTA in the Old West. Even The Last of Us kind of falls into that in the sense that it's building upon what I already know of playing Naughty Dog games in the Uncharted series. So the thing that I kind of keep coming back to, I suppose, is the experience. The game offering me something compelling, unique, some aspect of the gameplay that gets my attention and says, you're gonna be able to do something here that you've never been able to do before. Even or maybe it's something you've done before but never quite like this or never this well or whatever. Just since we're talking about Rockstar, thinking about L.A. Noire as an example,
right?
And that game was not terribly successful, and it's got its flaws, right. Certainly, but it's one of my favorite games of last generation, purely because of the fact that it was singular. It really, really was unique, and what it was trying to do in turning the process of police investigation into gameplay I absolutely loved, and I desperately hope that somebody's going to come along and realize that there was a really good idea in that game that had some other things around it that didn't go so great, but if you kind of brush that stuff aside and just focused on that one idea, I think you'd have, kind of like a Guardians of the Galaxy, I think you'd have something both unique and successful.
Do you think that could also be part, because they didn't start that project from the ground up, right? Didn't they buy?
No, it was developed by, they're based in Australia. What's the fucking developer?
Yeah, I can't remember. My whole thought process though is like maybe if it had been from the ground.
Team Bondi. Yeah, it was developed by Team Bondi, and then there was a bunch of drama behind the scenes, and I think Rockstar actually took over the project at one point. Because they weren't
really happy with the end result.
Yeah, they weren't happy with where things are going.
And I wonder though if that could be an example of one that, like, had it been started from the ground up, because these teams had so many successes from other 2K properties that maybe I don't know, it's sort of like you can't have any one of the elements that we're talking about.
Right,
it's like you don't have to have
them all. It almost has to be all.
Yeah, you don't necessarily have to have all of them, but you have to have a few of them. You have to either have a lot of money behind you and a great idea, or a great idea and a really interesting concept, or you know what I mean. You got to have a few of these things going for you, and or timing. Like you come out when there's just a dearth of other games, and so you somehow you kind of.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, there are plenty of games. There are plenty of games that are very worthwhile and really fun, and that people talk like, oh, you got to go play this, but they just get overlooked because they happen to be streeting at the same time as some really popular mainstream title that just overshadows them.
That's one reason whatever. We've talked about it a couple times over the years, but I've never quite understood why so many companies hit that end of the year so strong. Like I kind of get it, I kind of see some side to it. I'm not saying that's a stupid idea, but it always seems like there should be a little more of that, like, you know what, why don't we just hold this game for 6 months, bring it out in a time when there's not as many games coming out? Will it be more successful? And I don't know. Obviously I don't think it would be, because I really think these companies, the one thing you can give them credit for is they like to make money. So, if they feel like they'll sell more copies of it at a given time, they'll do it. But I've never understood that.
There's definitely been games over the years that I've played that have benefited from that exact thing. Yeah. Well, I mean, like when Red Dead Redemption came out, I want to say
that came spring or something like that, wasn't it?
Yeah, I was going to say like May is what I wanted to say. But when that game came out, I didn't have anything to do for, I didn't really have anything else that I was playing, whatever, for a couple months, and all I did was play Red Dead Redemption. And so like that game came out
at a great time.
And yeah, it was. I'm looking at it now. It was May 18th. And,
so that's the experience you'll have with Gotham Knights too.
Perfect time. Yeah, thank you, Tony. Thank you. But actually going back to Batman Arkham, the first game, the Batman Arkham Asylum, very much the same way. That game came out, I think maybe August or early September, something like that. But it kind of came out before the Rocktober rush. Yeah. And it was the same thing. Like it came out in a period of time where I could dedicate a lot of time to that. I didn't have a lot of other things distracting me. Of course, at the time, that was a new IP. Yeah. Based on an existing property, but it really did benefit from I think a well-timed release. Yep. And of course, now the series is strong enough that they can come out in an October window. I mean, not that they're going to, but that they could theoretically come out in an October window and do really well.
If there's anything, our audience, a parting thing as we're getting ready to wind down our podcast, if there's anything they can learn from us, I hope that they really learn how to execute a well-timed release.
I was about to say, if porn has taught us anything, and that's the benefit of a well-timed release.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the question, Justo. We appreciate it. And if you guys have a question for us, I'm very sorry, but
turn to the person on your left and ask them.
You've probably missed your opportunity on that because we are hanging up the microphone next week. But we will be back tomorrow with an all-new edition of Epic Battle Cry, fueled by your questions. So please tune in for that, and tune in next week for an audio-only retrospective and farewell from the EBC crew. We'll be back tomorrow. For Daniel Kaiser and Tony Grice, I'm Brent Adams. Remember, cry havoc and let your voice be heard.